has asked for more time to look at your material. It's not easy to find or validate information such as this without conducting meticulous research. So I was told that the apostles were conducting meticulous research into my work. I'm not sure I actually believe that, but I'm not at the stage to accuse an apostle of being a liar. So I think perhaps we won't never know. Anyway, I did get another letter a bit later on, but by the time I had got it, I had found out some more stuff, and I sent them some more things, including the stuff that they were supposed to be researching. I actually found on the internet work by apologists that covered polyandry, so I sent it to them. You know, and also the First Vision stuff and the Book of Abraham. I had no idea it existed. When I found out, I sent it to them as if nobody had ever told them before. I was a little bit naive. And finally, having sent all this stuff in, and months later saying, look, where's my answer? I got a letter that said this. It may well be that you and I will have to wait until we stand face to face beyond the veil of death to obtain a complete understanding, blah, 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 blah. I'm not willing to commit my life to something that I have to wait till I'm dead to find out whether I was right or wrong. That's the last I heard from them. It wasn't the last I heard from me. I'll come back to that in a moment. Now, what I sent to them was by Samuel Katish. It's an article. I'm putting the link up first. Now, what you got to remember is that whilst I played with words earlier, you can't play with polyandry. It's a woman that marries more than one man. It's a definitive. You can't subdivide it. You can't play games with it. That's it. And Joseph Smith et al. Did it. That's the link in case anybody wants to write it down. I'm putting it at the beginning rather than the end. But you get it off YouTube, so you get that anyway. Katish, I've discovered, did the same research that I did. He found that at least 8 of the 11 women were polyandrous. Fair enough. He gives the dates, the details, the names, whether they're members, non-members, whether they're young or old, whether they're active, inactive, who had babies with who. It's all there. So they've got all of that. But then, of course, being an apologist, he knows it's contrary to doctrine. He's just provided all the evidence that detract. I feel like Joey from Friends when I do that. That a detractor would find. But he's dug himself such a deep hole. Where does an apologist go when you've proven polyandry was a definite and it was contrary to doctrine? Well, he does the only thing that an apologist can do, which is why if ever they bother to critique my work, which I doubt they will, I will never respond, because they're just the puppets of the prophets. They just tell lies every day. They're faced with the truth, and they haven't got the integrity to stand up and be counted. They prove something is black, black, and think, oh my goodness, now what have I done? Okay, we're going to call that white, and we're going to move on from there. And they do that. You check what they write. It's what I call a turning point statement. They make all the things, and they say, because we think that, and because that might have happened, we can suppose this could have, and therefore this could have been the end result, and that's what we'll believe in. It's crap. It's not evidence. We have to look for evidence. Well, this is what Katish does to get out of his hole. He says, you might want to read this twice, applying the definition of polyandry to describe these marriages is misleading because its compatibility deviates with LDS marital theology. That last bit means because it's contrary to doctrine. Because it's contrary to doctrine, and Joseph Smith did it, oh, it can't be polyandry. We'll have to call it something else. So Katish wants to rewrite the dictionary. He says, in the case of Joseph Smith, the traditional definition, and there's only one, remember, I can play with words, but not this one. The traditional one doesn't apply, and what do we have to do? We have to redefine the term, rather than reject the prophet. He doesn't say how, but he does tell us why. He says it's in light of the eternal perspectives involved. There aren't any eternal perspectives. It's contrary to doctrine. He's proven that. And he says, because the lack of temporal extent these matters, that's apologetic gobbledygook for saying because we don't know much about them. Well, we do. We know everything about them because he's just written an article including everything. Apart from the fact that he's got one of the surnames of the women wrong. He mixes them up. And although he mentions a couple of babies by one, he misses out a baby. So if there's anything missing, it's because he missed it out. That's all. We know everything about it. Now, plays on words by the church. On the church website, there's a section on the Relief Society. Zena Diantha Huntington Young was a Relief Society president, late 1800s. There's a little bio about how well she did, and she worked with Sister Snow, and they did the silk production, which never worked out very well, so why God had them do that, only he knows. And at the end of each one, it just says about their marriages, and in her case, this is what the church website said. Widowed by her first husband, she raised 2 sons from that marriage, 1 daughter from her later marriage to Brigham Young. and 4 of Brigham Young's children. Well, forget the 4 Brigham Young's children. It doesn't matter how many she raised of them. Those statements are individually quite true. But underlying them are a pack of lies. And I'll show you why, and then we'll come back to look at that again. Let's look at the true history of Zena. And this is documented and accepted by the church. The first thing that happened in her life was that she married Henry Jacobs in 41. That's not the first thing that happened. She, with her sister, had the unfortunate experience, like a lot of young girls, of being housemaids in the Smith household. And any young girls that ended up in the Smith household as housemaids or adopted daughters, that's an English expression I'm not going to use, because I haven't checked whether it's acceptable over here. But he tried to marry them. And Zena twice refused Smith as a teenager because she was too scared to let him bed her. Whatever. But after she had married Henry, 7 months later, or 7.5 months later, she did enter a polyandrous marriage. She was 7 months pregnant at the time. And then Smith sent Henry, she was beautiful and he fancied her. So he sent Henry off on some missions to the east and spent much time with her. Smith died in 44, and just after that she entered another polyandrous marriage with Brigham Young. And he also took more than a fancy to Zena, sent poor old Henry Jacobs, has to be one of the most gullible and horribly faithful men in history. I really feel sorry for him. He was sent off to England. Meanwhile, Young persuades Zena to live with him. By the time they get to winter quarters, she's openly living with him as a wife. Well, later on, she married him, confirmed in the temple. She was 7 months pregnant again, and she had a baby by Young in 1850. Now, these are the deaths. Young died in 77. Henry died in 86, 9 years later. And then when Henry died, the sons that Henry and Zena had were 44 and 40 years old, respectively. And, of course, Henry and Zena were never divorced. Those are the historical facts. Let's go back and see what the church said about that. Remember? They right words, wrong order. So underlying what the church pretends was the case is a lie. I wrote to Jeff Holland and said, I'm just not having that. I said, how can you publish Article of Faith 12 and the standards of integrity and as apostles put this crap on the internet? I actually said that I don't believe the apostles today have any more integrity than the apostles of old by this standard. It's just not on. And I pointed out another one. There's loads of things, but I pointed out, like somebody mentioned last night about the Kirtland Bank fraud. I pointed out, and I think it was a 2008 Priesthood Manual, there was a section on that, and at the beginning it says, some members of the church opened a bank. And then they got a bit annoyed because Joseph Smith, as prophet, didn't see that God didn't tell him that there was going to be some banking problems and everybody would lose their money. I said, you can't put that in a Priesthood Manual. Unless you're going to tell the truth. Joseph Smith opened a bank himself to con everybody out of their money and their gold and their silver and their property, and even put his own loan notes into it. He couldn't get a charter. It wasn't legal, so they opened it anyway, illegally. They capitalised it at $5 million, and the whole banking community in the state was capitalised at less than $9 million. They didn't have halfpennies to rub together, as we say, 2 cents, I suppose, we over here. They had no money. He got everything out that he could, and within weeks he just abandoned it and walked away. Within months it went under. And in the middle of the night, one night, Joseph and Hiram Smith had to run away in the middle of the night. Not from mobs, but from angry members and half a dozen apostles that were after his blood. H.B.C. Kimball wrote in his journal that he doubted you could find 20 people in the world that would have considered Joseph Smith a prophet at that time. Shows the tenacity of the guy, because if he recovered from that and got all these... He had something, I don't know what it was, but he had something. So that was the truth. And I said to Jeff, you can't do this. Anyway, when I was publishing Volume 1, I went back on to check the web links, and that's gone. They've taken it off. The bio is still there, and she's now the only Relief Society president that doesn't say who she married. But the whole bio calls her sister Young, so now everybody will think she only ever married Brigham Young. So one lie always leads to another. And then I read a thread on RFM last year that actually said, I don't know if it's true or not, but somebody said that Jeff Holland had assigned none other than Ken Johnson to revamp all of the church manuals. So I'm just wondering if it's true, whether or not my letter had an effect, and maybe they're trying to pretend to have integrity, but I'm afraid it will be far too little and far too late for most of us. Review of one other lady who was a polyandrous, I don't know if that's a word, but I'll make it up, polyandrous lady, C.O.S. Sessions. I'm just showing this just to give you a flavour of what went on for anybody that doesn't know the background to the polyandry side. She married Windsor Lyon in March or April 1838. These are all things the church accepts. She married Joseph Smith as a polyandrous wife, or he was a polyandrous husband. I'm told that men can't be polyandrous. It's the women that I don't know. But anyway, they married. He died in 44, then she married Kimball. Now, unusually in this case, her first husband died. Most of them survived beyond the polyandrous husbands. So Lyon died in 49. At the time, Silver was still in Iowa. And she wrote to Kimball and said, you know, can you send my brother, Peregrine, to collect me? Well, the letter arrived in July because the post mail wasn't as quick as it is now. I think planes must have flown slower in those days. Anyway, Peregrine takes 2.5 months to cross the plains and collect his sister. He arrived on New Year's Day, and what happened next must have been like a scene from a movie. You can imagine 2.5 months across the plains, you arrive at your sister's house to find that that very night she's getting married to somebody else. So she married Ezekiel Clark, a non-member, wealthy businessman and politician, and Peregrine had gone all that way to collect her, and she wasn't going. I'd have been a bit put out if I was Peregrine, to be honest. Anyway, this, of course, was yet another polyandrous marriage because she was still married to Kimball. They really didn't care what went on in polygamy. Anything goes. And then she decided to go back and live with Heber the following year. Ezekiel thought she was just visiting, and when she didn't come back, he went the following year to try and collect her and get her to come back. She wouldn't go, so the following year he married somebody else. And that's just to give you an idea of what goes on. Anything goes, especially when it comes down to what Brigham Young wanted. Now, Young said there was another way in which a woman could leave a man if a woman wanted to. She could marry somebody higher in authority if he's willing to take her on. No bill of divorce required. Perfectly all right in the sight of the Lord. I know why he said that. Now, this is opinion. I told you there's no opinions unless I tell you. Young said the men were going off on missions, converting women, and if they're any good to them, marrying them and bringing them back. He said, look, chaps, don't do this. Bring them back so we can all have a look, share them out. I'm paraphrasing church history here. But that really did happen. And of course, it occurred to me that if you haven't got enough single women, go after the married ones. So if you don't fancy your husband, marry some. You can't get higher than an apostle, can you? Marry up in the priesthood. That's my phrase. I coined that. Marrying up in the priesthood. Well, that's what they did. So they'd send men on missions, and if they fancied one of the wives and she wasn't having a good time because she was about the 5th wife in a sequence and wasn't being looked after, come live with me, girl. Walk out of one home and into another. No divorce required. Now, just in case, the church in 100 years' time when we're all dead, well, some of us might not be, but I will be, in case they try to say that was just more young rhetoric and it never happened, just like they do blood and blood atonement, which they pretend never happened, and yet it survived for decades through several successive prophets until Fielding Smith didn't like them and dropped them, although he was party to it all. TMD Volume 3, read that. In case they do that, there are people alive today that can testify that it happened, and at least one person is in this room, and that's my good friend and fellow author, Arthur Evans. Where are you, Arthur? Stand up. Arthur, stand up a moment. You'll all know Arthur. If you haven't got his book, The Keystone of Mormonism, pick it up. It's out there for you. Now, stay standing. Stay standing. Stay standing. Now, in Arthur Evans' book, almost in passing, he says that his own great aunt went to conference one day, married to one man, and went home married to an entirely different man, courtesy of a visiting apostle. Can you confirm that's true, Arthur?
Yeah.
Thank you, my friend. Have a seat.
My grandfather's sister, Phoebe, was living in Stevenson. A general authority from Salt Lake came down and told her that the state president wanted her for his wife, and it was her duty to marry the state president. She went home with him. And her husband went alone. She took her children and went home with her.
Thank you. Thank you, Arthur. Bless you. I'm glad you said that because I was going to try and paraphrase that, and you've done an excellent job of that. It appears in what was said that the women had a choice, but they didn't. The women did what they were told, and in the church today they still do. Believe it or not. For those that don't believe it, you're probably a man. Okay, so